focus on is just have the opportunity for us as colleagues to kind of share our experience in going to this virtual online environment. I am by no means an expert in this area. A lot of the tips that I am providing to you, I've learned the hard way with the errors that I've made on my end. I came into teaching about 20 years ago. I was hired by Schoolcraft to really help them implement an online accounting curriculum. So my experience is in the community college realm. So that means I typically have smaller class sizes, and I focus on those principles and intermediate accounting courses. So I know I have colleagues in the room. Elizabeth Cameron is here with me, so she's going to be able to kind of chime in with her experiences at a university level. And so if others of you have things you'd like to share that have worked, particularly with your larger class sizes, please feel free to share that. So I'm going to get started here. Okay. So we are going to try and just use 2 polling questions just to kind of give you an idea of a different way that you can put polling into any type of virtual lecture. It is a way to kind of enhance that engagement and get an understanding of where your audience is at. So for today, we are using the MICPA software that they use. So you will need to go to your browser on your device, either your cell phone or your laptop. You enter in I think that should be MICPA.cnf.io. Select today's meeting, which is the Educators Roundtable. So here's our first poll question. You've taught online before, or COVID caused you to teach online for the first time? So let's see, Jody, can you see what's happening on the, oh, there we go, great. Okay, so that's a very interesting split. We are virtually half and half. For those of you who COVID caused you to be the first time online, congratulations, you made it. I know it was probably a very difficult transition, but since you're all on this call, I can see that you survived.
Michelle, this is Elizabeth. Can I interject for a second?
Please do.
I just want to tell everyone, if you're using a Cengage book, which has MindTap as its homework platform, the students can download an app, which I use in class all the time, which allows you to do very easy polling. I even use it giving exams. I let them poll the audience and put in a multiple choice question to de-stress them. So they really do like it, and it's really good too when some students may not participate except for the poll.
So Elizabeth brings up a great point. It is a way to create engagement. It kind of also, I would suggest doing polls periodically throughout your virtual lecture, just maybe doing one right in the beginning to get the pulse of your audience, and then periodically to just check their understanding of what you've been talking about. Lots of there are different polling softwares you could use. I actually happen to use, at Schoolcraft, we use Blackboard, and we have a Blackboard Collaborate feature, which has polling embedded right in the class. So if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to check with your campus IT people to see if it is part of your learning management systems or part of the textbooks software that you use.
And this is Deb Habel. Michelle, I would tell you that we use Teams mostly. Because it's behind our firewall, it's not a separate product. So we use Teams with I use Teams at least, but there is an app that goes within Teams called Polly, P-O-L-L-Y. that you can attach right within Teams, and that will do polls as well. And they're really quick to set up and run.
Perfect. All right, so I think we got everyone here. Jessica, I'm going to, let's see, Jessica, I lost controls to be able to, there we go. So one of the things I would encourage all of you, especially those of you who are new to online, you're probably getting the idea that being online is not necessarily an easier way to teach. There's a lot that goes involved with not only the design, but the amount of time you actually spend in an online class. In my experience it tends to be more. So as you approach this and you're getting ready to maybe prepare for the fall semester, since I know there's still a lot of uncertainty about the fall semester, I would encourage you to reflect on your own practices as an educator and keep in mind that student success is just as much dependent on the effort that you're willing to put in as your students. So going online, especially in the beginning, takes a lot of upfront work in planning and design.
Michelle, I would add to that, again, it's Deb, that for me, in my experience, it was probably 3 times as long to do a lecture as it was to actually conduct a lecture. And after winter semester, the feedback I had from my intro to managerial course was that they preferred the online because it gave them, they could pause it, they could back up, rerun it, and they were right up there on the screen. It was right in front of them. So they could, it was just, they thought it was better.
So thank you, Deb. That actually leads me kind of into the next topic I wanted to talk about with online. It's this concept of synchronous online learning versus asynchronous online learning. When I started 20 years ago in online, everything was basically asynchronous. I set up the class at the beginning of the semester. It was very text heavy, if you will. And students would then just email me and we would correspond back and forth through email. A lot has changed in this time period. And so what I use now is really a blended approach where I have things that are both synchronous, which would be a live interactive lecture, and then I have asynchronous content. That asynchronous content, as Deb described, what students like about that is the ability to do it on their own time frame and with their own degree of learning. So they can stop, they can rewatch, they can fast forward based on where they're at with their learning. So, as we move forward into the fall semester, at our institution anyway, we are going to be having a combination of converting things to online that are completely online, and then those courses that were designed to be on campus, we are taking as much of those components as we can and going to do those remotely, but during the exact same time that the student had enrolled for the class. So on our campus, we definitely are going to be having a combination of both those asynchronous and synchronous opportunities to engage with the students. Okay, one of the key things, and this comes from, I'm at home now. When I had to move everything over to online in March 13th, I think was the date, that I also had 3 children that came home and had to start doing all of their learning online, both college students and high school. And so what I learned from them is the high degree of frustration the students feel with not knowing. Mm-hmm. So my suggestion to you is to communicate. I would recommend identifying a particular policy of how you like to communicate, because there are different methodologies. You can use email, you can use messaging, you could create some type of social media. Use what works best for you, but define that and set that policy with your students on how they can get feedback from you. and have it so that it's frequent. More is better, early and often. So I establish with my students, my communication plan is, I promise to respond to them, within 24 hours, Monday through Friday, but I do not check anything over the weekends. And so I adhere to that. And I actually have them message me through the software we have in our learning management system, so that any of that communication actually stays organized and stays in the course rather than having them email me. Another great way to communicate with your students is discussion boards. Discussion boards allow them to kind of ask more of those general questions that they would ask in the classroom if they were raising their hand. And then you can provide a response. And by using a discussion board that is public to all the students in the class, just like if you were to answer a question in class, everyone would hear it. So that's a good way to use discussion boards when you want to provide more public information to all of your students, and then use some type of messaging or emailing when you need to have a private conversation with the student.
I'll just jump in here and say that I'm teaching a class right now, and sometimes you'll have a student who is very timid and they won't post on the discussion board. And what they'll do is they'll post on the chat directly to you. And what I have learned to do is, when it's a question about content, can you please define this for me? I take that and put that over into the discussion board and say, this was an excellent question. I thought all of you would like to know the answer to that. And what I've found is, when I do that, the student who is a little bit timid goes, hey, I asked a really great question. I think I can do this. So I think that's a way to empower the students who might be that way in class until they get a little positive affirmation as well.
No, that's a good point.
Michelle, we have a question on the chat from Kevin, who is wondering, since you don't check messages on the weekends, do you not have homework due on the weekends?
So the answer is no, I do not have homework due on the weekends. So with my online classes, I have work due on Fridays. But they have the availability to work on it all week. So that's an excellent question. Consider your timing of your communication policy along with when your assignments are due. And the other thing that makes me think of, Kevin, is, now I don't particularly have this working at the community college, but my two older daughters are at the University of Michigan, and they have students who are really at this point all over the world. So thinking about time zones when you are hosting any virtual lectures or when you have due dates, it is kind of something to consider as well. So Kevin, I hope that answered your question.
Michelle, I have a question too, is how do you, and maybe others in the group can offer feedback, because it's really difficult when you're doing a lecture, right? If you're doing it synchronously, to monitor the chat and do the lecture and monitor the discussion board. I mean, how do you juggle all of that?
I'll take that.
Have you found a way?
That's an excellent point. Hold on a moment till we get to that slide. You're right, it is difficult to do. So we do have, Elizabeth and I talked about some tips to help with that.
I will be your segue manager today.
Thank you. So here we go. That was actually a perfect segue, Deb. So some technology tips. What I found is, I am by no means a technology expert. I learn as I go, and trial and error is how I've found many of these things out. Deb, to your point, what I actually do is with each virtual lecture, I ask for a student volunteer to be my chat monitor. So if you notice, we are actually modeling that in this roundtable. So Jody is being the chat monitor, so I don't have to sit and watch that. I just select a student who comes in and I ask, hey, can somebody be my chat monitor? Watch what's going on. If a question pops up, please speak up. So that's one way to do it. Elizabeth, I know you have a little bit of a different way to handle that, so I'll let you describe that.
Sure. In my class at the beginning of the semester, and I have done this whether I'm in person or whether I'm online, and it's hugely helpful, is I will ask for a student volunteer to be my technology assistant, to help other students as they have technology issues, because sometimes when you've showed it in class and showed how the homework platform works or Teams works, they're like, oh, the professor already showed me and I still didn't get this, or I'm having hardware connection problems, which is outside of my knowledge area. You'll have a lot of our students, we think they're the technology generation, and if you talk to them, they'll tell you we're not. We're the social media generation. So they really like having a student that they can contact, and it's been also helpful too. I do the same thing Michelle does, is, you know, I assign it just like it's a regular class, so they can do their homework if they want on the weekend, but the assignments are not there. But if they're working on something and they struggle with a technology problem, or an assignment really should be backed up because you set a due date and you missed it and you haven't gotten that far yet because you're a little behind on lecture, the technology assistant will be the one who sends me a Mayday message saying, can you open up that assignment for another 2 days? Hugely helpful. I let them put that as a byline on their resume, makes them feel really happy. And the other students, it'll up your teaching evaluations. The other students think you've just done the kindest thing for them. They absolutely love it.
So thank you, Elizabeth. I actually will tell you that having a chat monitor and an IT specialist when you're doing virtual lectures that's a student is really helpful. I actually do that even at home on my personal Zoom meetings that I do with my family. I designate one of my children to be IT support for their grandparents, and it works beautifully. Another tip, when you are doing a virtual lecture, always have a video and audio, have an audio dial-in. What I am finding, you know, there's varying degrees of equipment that our students have. So while if they're an online student, they obviously have a computer, but that doesn't necessarily they have video and audio on that computer. So sometimes I will have students that log in with their computer, but need to use their cell phone in order to get the audio link. So just want to make sure that you can include both of those in there. Now in the software that we use at Schoolcraft, we use Blackboard Collaborate, and that is an option setting that I need to select when I create that virtual learning classroom.
And
Go ahead.
So you guys are aware, my husband doesn't have a camera on his computer next door in his office. And so he's found an application on his phone that will work as a video camera with Zoom calls. So
Okay.
I'm going to dig my messages and emails and find that, and I'll post that in the chat.
Thank you, Deb. So if you are doing any virtual sessions, you do want to record them. That way for students who want to rewatch them or happen to be working when you're doing your virtual lecture, they still have access to the content. What I will tell you here, I always put a big sticky note on the side of my computer before I launch any of my virtual lectures to remind myself to hit record. You know, it's very easy to forget to do that because I have. So give yourself some type of reminder to hit record. And then lastly, it's technology. And again, we are not technology experts. We are content experts in the field of accounting. And sometimes technology just doesn't work. And it can be unsettling. So it's okay if it's unsettling. Just try and develop a backup plan. I've had poor internet connections. I've lost, I couldn't get a slide to come into the presentation. So there is a little bit of having to think on your feet. But if you kind of play around with your technology that you have before you get into a virtual lecture, that helps. So kind of set it up beforehand so that you can troubleshoot before you get into the session. And if all fails and the session doesn't work, you end it and follow it up with a direct communication to the students, saying it didn't work today, this is what I intended to cover, and then give them an alternative of, you know, go into the class, watch this video, or read these pages in the textbook, or, you know, watch something on YouTube, if you have to.
Michelle, can I add 2 points to that? I want to say, make sure that when you record your sessions that you give a disclaimer to the students. Say, I want to remind you all we're recording this session, because when you do that, it's going to show the video as well, and some of them will have forgotten that you're recording it. So I think it's really important to do that. And I'm notorious, Michelle, for forgetting to record, saying I'm going to record this, because you get so excited about what you're teaching. So I have turned that over to my student, who is so vigilant about, they just enjoy it when they can say, you forgot to push the record, push the record. And that makes sure that you don't forget, is when you have that second backup person, and my technology assistant does that. They should get paid. They're so valuable.
Yes. So thank you. And as I was doing this slide, something popped up even in my household. If many of you have other people living with you at home while you're doing this, I apologize if you heard the coffee grinder in the background. One of my children just got up. So let's move on to the next slide. Here's something that when I started doing these virtual lectures, it was funny. I did some virtual lectures where I would come in with my baseball hat on and my sweats, and I kind of just really didn't think about how I looked. And I watched a video of myself, and when you have to see yourself back, you become a little more critical. But I also thought, you know, I would never walk into the classroom and deliver a lecture in the classroom with my sweatpants and baseball hat on. And so I shouldn't think that I should do that in the virtual world either. So I did kind of become more aware of what my appearance was in this virtual world. And I had to learn a little bit about some tips and tricks for having a background, for lighting. So I wanted to just share those with you. The MICPA has a video how-to sheet that I have up on the screen that will just kind of give you some good tips. And then the AICPA has a really short video lecture on lighting and how to take care of your audio. So these slides will be available to you after this session, and so you will have the links that you can check those out afterwards. Okay, so we're ready for a poll question. So I want to move into cheating. Cheating seems to be a hot topic on everybody's minds. So we're going to move into the next question here. You'll use that micpa.cnf.io link again. So just trying to get your idea of, do you think cheating is the same as traditional, more than traditional, or less than traditional?
Michelle, while everyone is answering that poll question, we have another question on the chat. This one's geared to Elizabeth, actually. So Donna wants to know, Elizabeth, what technology are you using for recorded live lecture? Michelle said she is using Blackboard.
Great. I was just typing a response to that. I'm using Microsoft Teams. It comes, most campuses, it's standard with your Microsoft package. And what I like about it is it automatically auto-populates students' email addresses, easy to enter everything. Everything's all in one place. And it's super easy if you didn't know a single thing about technology to be able to record, and it posts automatically right into your learning path. So really super easy. The students have loved it.
Okay, so it looks like we have quite a few responses coming in. And overwhelmingly, it looks like we as educators think that there is more cheating happening online? Well, here's what I can tell you. The research is actually inconclusive on whether it's more, less, or the same. But we as educators know two things. The perception is that it's easier to cheat online. And we also know that since the beginning of education, cheating has always been an issue. So how do we deal with that? So I focus on how can I reduce that perception, right? If my students think that it is easier to cheat online, I'm trying to focus on decreasing that perception to them so that they don't cheat. So I just kind of put up a few things that we can do to try and combat that perception. I think first and foremost, for us as educators, we just have to accept that if this is an online course, it's going to be an open book, open note exam. So treat it accordingly. So build your assessments knowing that. One of the things I do in my orientation at the beginning of class, and I also do it as a reminder for every test review, is we talk about what academic integrity means. I have them sign a student code of conduct that is specific to the online environment. I also have my face-to-face students do one as well. And I remind them that they took that oath. With that acknowledgement, you know, there are things you can do. I do mine as part of the exam review. You could actually even set it up within the test to be like an adaptive release test where you ask them to take a pledge before the exam will be released. So it identifies for them that you take cheating seriously, that you do not expect that they will cheat. And then in addition to identifying that code of conduct, I would also identify maybe some of the things you do to detect cheating. Tell them, you know what, this is an online class. You would be amazed at the amount of data analytics I can do on every click that you complete in this class. So make them aware that you do watch and follow that stuff. On a design standpoint, for any assessments you do, these might be obvious to you, but I thought I would point them out. Have multiple versions of an exam or a quiz. In the online environment, that's actually pretty easy to generate, and you can use question pools. So there's large volume of pools for every learning objective you want to achieve. You can set the number of questions that come out of that pool. And you can use questions that are algorithmic. So while students get very similar questions, they have different dollar amounts in them. And then I would vary the question types. You know, when we talk about that design element, you know, I wouldn't do true, false, or multiple choice. While you can use some of those, I wouldn't have your whole exam that. So I would do a combination of those types of questions along with problem solving and short essay. So Elizabeth, did you have anything you wanted to add maybe on design?
I would just say that you have the opportunity to set timelines for your students, just like you do in class, that they have a specific amount of time for the number of multiple choice or practice problems you give them, or what have you. I tend to give where it will rotate the questions for the students. But I also wanted to address that I think maybe sometimes because their scores improved, and many of us saw this, where maybe on campus, they got a 70 in your class, and then they go to online and they got a 90, and we might assume that that's cheating. But what I found with my students is I found myself actually putting up more tools and resources to help them. They had more practice problems, and they also reported back to me they had more time. They didn't have their practice for their sports team and their sorority and all these other events. So many students were able to, you know, just hunker down and put more time into it. But I think if you do what Michelle's talking about with your question pools and you change them. The other thing is, don't release the answers to the questions until after everyone has taken the test. That's a really important tip.
Yes. So thank you, Elizabeth. That leads me into my next slide here.
And there are some great tips coming across on chat. Everybody is sharing with each other too. So if you don't have the chat feature open, highly encourage you to take a peek at it, because lots of good ideas from everybody on the call.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Elizabeth mentioned a few other tips about cheating is really thinking about the settings or the options you put in for the release of that exam. So, you know, three things here. Time limits. You know, while it is an open book and open note, you don't necessarily want to give them an untimed exam where they could take 5 hours to do it, because then they have more time to find the answers, whereas in class we would kind of expect them to be able to know it on the spot. So my quizzes and exams will have time limits. I was asked a question, how do you know how long to give them? I have a general rule of thumb where I give them 3 to 4 times what it would take me as an instructor to complete the exam, kind of depending on the question types. In addition to limiting the amount of time they take the exam, you might want to consider the availability. You know, some professors would like to have the exam available just on a particular day or at a particular time. The things I would suggest there is really understand who your student population is, kind of going back to that time zone comment. That, you know, if you have somebody who's in the central time zone and you're in the Eastern time zone and you think doing it at 9 in the morning is great, they might not think so. So you want to think about the amount of time given to take the exam, as well as how long you want that exam open and available for the student to complete. We already mentioned using random order. And then Liz brought this up, controlled feedback. This is actually a new feature I discovered this semester. I hadn't used it before, but moving forward, when I design my classes for fall, I'm going to be utilizing this feature much more heavily. So controlled feedback, as Elizabeth indicated, is you can have it where the student takes the exam, but they don't get their results or see what the answers are until a particular time frame. So I typically set it that it won't be released until the due date has passed. That is a feature in most of your online learning systems. I use Wiley, and in Wiley Plus, that is a feature that you can use. Elizabeth, I know you said you use Cengage. I would imagine they probably have something similar.
They do, and it's super easy to apply. It's not complicated. And the more that we do this, students start to understand that that's not available. It closes a loop, closes an opportunity for them. And then if you're rotating the questions that different students get, they won't put the time into it. They don't have that much energy to do that.
Good.
There's a number of questions on the chat about lockdown browsers and whether they work. And I will tell you that here at Wayne, we use Respondus, the lockdown browser with Monitor. And it's really up to, it allows the student when they're connecting in I agree with you, Elizabeth, on the issue with Respondus not allowing students to do outside tools. So it doesn't work for us if they're going to use Excel or something else. It really is for a exam that they're doing right on the screen through Canvas. But it does allow for them to come in. They have to show their ID, you know, ID match the face, and then they have to do an area check and, you know, wave the computer around their room and show that they're not having any resources. But it does require that we then go back and follow up on the tape, and the tape then flags spots where the student's face has left the screen, so they're clearly referencing something else. And so, we've had some interesting catches.
So Deb, one of the things, I don't use that particular software. I don't use a web browser lockout other than what is available in Wiley Plus for the student. My only comment there is, again, keep in mind that students can be clever. So it's the design of the exam. Whether, even though you lock out a browser, that doesn't mean they don't have an iPhone sitting next to them on their chair that you can't see. So
we've actually had students, one of my colleagues was telling me about it. She teaches stats, and the student forgot that they were being audibly recorded. And so they stepped away from the computer for a moment, got on the phone, and sent an email with screenshots of the test to one of the testing services, and got on the phone with somebody and made sure they knew how long they had to get it done to get it back so they could submit their answers on time.
yeah.
You know, it just, they're really creative. It's imperfect, but it's the best we've got right now, unless I can sit next to them.
Right. And think about this. All of us are in accounting, so we all have to deal with internal controls, right? It's an important part of what we teach. And, you know, one of the biggest things about internal controls is the tone at the top and how you project that. So it comes back to perception. I mean, be upfront and honest with your students that you check this and there are consequences if it happens. Okay, so I just wanted to identify just some resources for those of you out there on the call that you might find useful. The first one up here is Harvard Business Review, Inspiring Minds. And Deb, that was one that you utilized, so would you be willing to share a little bit about what you found useful?
Yeah, they are just continually sending one tip after another. I mean, it started from a really simple survey. I keep scanning HBR. I don't, in the classes that I teach, I don't necessarily have a lot of opportunity to use their case material, but they have a lot of really supportive resources. They offered a couple of online teaching opportunity videos that they have posted up there. They also have with a lot of really concrete advice. And they also were conducting at one point in time just a how you doing checkpoint every week, right? Is, you know, and monitoring everybody's attitude and success, and you know, how we're adjusting to the whole process. HBR also has case studies and, you know, articles, and all of that is free to educators. So if you like the Harvard Business Review magazine, you can get it free as an educator. It's online, but all of the resources are there, and, you know, you can download them. And in some cases, you know, there's some things that you can share with students, some things you can't, without licensing agreements. But, you know, they just have a lot. It's hard to say anything specific, right? There's just a lot of really great stuff there. Check it out.
Good. And then when Elizabeth and I were preparing for this, we talked about, you know, your textbook publishers have a lot of resources available for you. Elizabeth and I are both mentors for the publishing companies. So I am a faculty mentor for Wiley, and Elizabeth is a faculty mentor for Cengage.
Yep.
So you do see on the bottom of the slide our contact information. So if you have, you know, questions about those, we're pretty high-end users of those products. So, you know, we can kind of help you utilize it and give you tips of where we actually embed it in our curriculum.
And I'll just add to that, I'm the digital rep for Cengage Publishing. And what I have found is when I share my screen, and I know I appreciate this when somebody else does it for me when I'm learning something new, and I'll be reaching out to you, Deb, because we're getting Canvas. I heard that this morning at my school, and I haven't used that before. Somebody else can show you in a couple of minutes. Click here, here's the icon, this is sub-layered, 4 layers. And often we will spend so many hours trying to find things that if it was just pointed out to us, it'd be so much easier. So don't be afraid to reach out to any of us for help if we can help in any way.
Yes, great, thank you. You know, one of the books that I use, actually, that Wiley gave me, and I've got one right here. I put a link to the book. What I like about this, the Online Teaching Survival Guide, it's a really easy read, and it gives you practical tips of things that you can actually put in the classroom, and it centers a lot on student engagement, and it breaks it down as to how student engagement actually evolves through the course. So what types of things should be happening at the beginning of the semester versus the middle of the semester versus the end of the semester. Like I said, each one of the publishers, I have links to their websites where they have the resources available for transitioning to online. Wiley has this downloadable quick guide is a really one-pager that kind of will isolate different areas to focus on. And I put in here a Zoom comprehensive instruction guide. If any of you are using Zoom as a platform, as some educational institutions are using, Zoom came out with this instruction guide, and it just gives you how to set up a meeting, how to work in teams, and that type of stuff. So that was kind of the big broad brush of what Elizabeth and I wanted to cover today. We have a few minutes, I believe, for questions before Rachel's going to chime in.
Michelle, can I add 3 quick tips?
Absolutely, please do.
One is I've changed my coaching on online about why we're doing this. And when at first my students were nervous about using Microsoft Teams, and I said, look, this is a great job skill you're learning in addition to the class. And now they're so excited that they can tell people I'm really savvy and I can do that. So that would be one tip. The other thing that I've done is to share the controls. So students can see what it's like to be on the other side of using some of the things, so they're not just used it as a student to get those heightened skills, and it empowers them to work together and that sort of thing. And then be aware of how many platforms you're assigning for your students in an online class. Do they have Canvas? Do they have Wiley Homework? Do they have Zoom or Microsoft Teams? So the more that you can consolidate, because if they're on 3 platforms and they have 4 classes, it's a lot to keep track of. So try to find, 2, one homework one, and then something else. The more it has that you can be in one place, the easier it is for you and for them.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I've just put a note out here. Are any big blue button users out there? Because in the last 2 months, I have become very proficient with Zoom, very proficient with Teams. Friends of mine have hooked me up on some other social chat ones that you can do for conference calls. But now we also have big blue button. And so we're actually, and besides the Skype calls and web, the web, whatever, what's the web, I can't remember the name of it. But at any rate, the other conference call software, there so many different platforms, and it would be so nice if we could come up with some consistency across the board, because this semester alone, right, I'm teaching on Teams. I have a colleague teaching, my class that I'm taking is on Big Blue Button. I have a colleague teaching on Zoom that I sometimes have to get onto Zoom for, and I can spend a day and go from platform to platform to platform. And I think it's got to be crazy for the kids too. I don't know how we can standardize everybody. Again, I use Teams because it's behind our firewall. That's just my thing. Right. And I've not experimented with Big Blue Button as much. I tend to not allow them to, yeah, you're right. Student Sunday, you're right. Students will do all sorts of stuff, right? I tend to have all of the submissions and all of the assignments be through Canvas, and recordings and chat and attendance I take through Teams.
Yeah, so Michael put out a good point there that, different instructors are using different platforms or types of software and apps. So to have that, I would encourage you to keep that degree of empathy for what the students are experiencing. you know, most of them have a lot of, I don't want to say the word baggage, that's not really the right word, but they have a lot of uncertainty. They're coming in with difficult job markets and family situations and all of that uncertainty. And now they don't know what to do with their classes. They don't know where they're going to be in the fall. And so things that we can do to kind of reduce that stress level so that they can really focus on the learning that we wanted them to do. So creating that level of empathy.
Yeah, sorry, to add to that, Michelle, remember that you can use these resources as you advise your students. Many of us may end up online one way or the other in the fall, and they're likely not going to be coming into our office like they would be in the past, even if we are on campus due to social distancing. And students report they just feel calmer. They feel like they connect when they can see your expression. And it's super, super easy on any of the platforms to just click on the student and have a meeting. We're doing that with families. So think about that from the advising perspective.
Yeah, we use that. I have Teams loaded up on my phone and Zoom loaded up on my phone. And so students, I just tell them to click on Teams and connect to me. Yep. And they're ringing me anytime, right? I'm answering most of the time, right? Except if it's the middle of the night, but you know, they are able to get with me and they do appreciate that level of flexibility. The only thing I have a hard time with is during the synchronous class is being able to see their faces, right? It is really nice in this environment to be able to see everybody and see who's paying attention, who's doing their email, who's and who's checked out. The students, because in the synchronous session, they want to have the better bandwidth, right? When they don't want it consumed by video, they're muting their video.
Yeah.
And so you really don't know, you could be talking to the air. I'm grading papers on a project on something I'm co-teaching with a colleague today. And you can tell students that I'm looking at them, I'm like, I don't think anybody in this group has really ever attended a lecture.
Yeah.
They've turned it on, but I don't think they've ever been there.
So Deb, what I would say to that is, how do you treat that in the classroom? So when I'm in the classroom and I'm not sure who's paying attention and who's not, I simply ask them a question. So I do the same thing in my virtual lecture. But I know we're coming near the end and I want to make sure that I leave time for Rachel. So I wanted to end on kind of two things. To Deb's point about being available for students, be available for students, but define what that availability is. And that is good for your own mental health. There is not an expectation that you are available to your students 24/7. So, you know, I would encourage you for your own well-being is to set the parameters of your availability with your students. And lastly, I would say, you know, we started this conversation where 50% of you said COVID caused you to teach for the first time. You know, if you would have thought back on March 1st, if we had had this discussion and I would have told all of those individuals that in the next 2 weeks, you were going to have to convert everything you do into a virtual learning environment, you probably would have thought I was a little crazy and that it couldn't be done. But all of you did it. So it might not have been perfect. It could have been a little messy. It was, I'm sure, frustrating, but you did do it. So I would encourage you to use what you learned from that experience and build on it and continue to grow as we move forward with the summer, spring, and fall semesters. So I do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and I am going to turn it back over to Joni.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both to Michelle and to Elizabeth for putting this presentation together. I thought it was really interesting and I'm sure helpful for everybody. And right now I want to turn it over to the Government Relations Senior Manager here at the MICPA, Rachel Reardon, who has a few updates from the state that I think you're going to find very helpful. So Rachel, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me some time on this roundtable. I want to start off by, if you're experiencing any issues with interpretations from the state, if you're having concerns about qualifications to sit for the exam, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us at the MICPA. We often don't know that something's a concern or something's not right until we hear from our members. So I'm sorry for my phone ringing in the background here, but if you have questions or concerns about anything like that, please reach out. It's the best way for us to act on it and to advocate for you is if we know that something's an issue. And so you're talking to students every day and you have that information usually before we do. So please reach out if you're seeing anything. One thing I want to talk about is Jody said a message came in earlier about the continuous testing. Actually, this is perfect timing because I had a meeting this morning with the State Board of Accountancy and we reviewed the draft rules. So they will go to the work committee, and in that draft, we have the removal of exam windows and a switch to the continuous testing model that NASBA and the AICPA is advocating for. So we are moving forward with that here in Michigan. It's in the process of going through the whole rules process. As soon as that's officially promulgated, we'll make sure to get that out to all of you so that you know to tell your students that we're now on that continuous education model or continuous testing. With that being said, on the issue of testing, I've received a couple of calls from CPA candidates who have exam windows expiring. And the State Board of Accountancy has extended a blanket extension for any exam windows set to expire between April 1st and June 30th. They now will expire September 30th. And we are watching with testing centers reopening and what that will look like if we need to do an additional extension. But right now, nobody is going to lose the ability to sit because it's been a blanket extension. They do have the ability to apply for a further extension, but right now it's that September 30th, and hopefully by September 30th, people are sitting for the exam again, but we'll see how things progress and what it looks like, and if we need to apply for a further extension with the department. So let us know what you're hearing from your students, and if you think, if there's concern about that September 30th deadline, let me know. And then the last,
sorry, Rachel, what was that window again? Was that April what?
April 1 through June 30th.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think a question came in on chat. Hold on. So Anthony, I did hear that as well. We are getting, I just talked to a student who is looking to sit for the exam who said the closest exam window or the place that's open is a couple hundred from them. And that's one of the reasons the department has granted that extension. So the recommendation I gave to that individual was to keep an eye on when those are opening. As soon as they start to open, the MICPA will, of course, through our communication channels, get that out to all of you and to our student members as much as we can. But if in Michigan, these testing centers aren't opening, then we'll definitely work with the department to extend that window because we don't want people to lose their ability to sit or have to drive hundreds of miles to sit because that's pretty burdensome, especially, you know, if they're a non-traditional student. The woman I spoke to has 2 kids at home and she's can't spend her entire day traveling to go sit for an exam. So we are working on that and it is on our radar. So we will be sure to keep you all updated on where we're at with that. The other thing that are on the educators task force, you may have seen this. I know Deb Habel sent it out to you, but I wanted to provide an update on an interpretation change from the department. So it was brought to our attention that some Masters of Accounting students who had followed the guidance of their professors were being denied the ability to sit for the exam. So I reached out to NASBA and to the State Board of Accountancy to figure out what was going on. And back in September 2019, the department changed their interpretation as it relates to those 24 general business credits that students have to sit for the exam. And moving forward, the general math courses and general computer courses won't count towards general business. And then statistics courses will still count because that's one of the listed one of the listed subjects for those general business credits. Students won't be able to count statistics as quantitative methods, but they can count them as statistics. And so our big concern at the MICPA was that this interpretation was changed, but it was never communicated out to us or to educators. And this mainly impacts the non-traditional students, but we wanted to make sure that we were not guiding students the wrong way, because these students had gone through the process, were ready to sit for the exam, and then being denied eligibility. And so we are working with the department. I was emailing back and forth with the director of the Bureau of Professional Licensing yesterday about delaying that interpretation till the next academic year. So initially, when I had a conversation with the director, we asked to push that implementation of the interpretation to January 1, 2021. And then I talked to Michelle Randall and Deb Habel and a couple of our other educators and got some very valuable feedback that for you all, it's much easier to operate on an academic year than a calendar year, which is very helpful and makes perfect sense. And just, I don't live in your world, so I didn't think of that. So we are working with the department to make that interpretation be implemented in the next academic year, so September of 2021. So I will be sure to make sure all of our educators know. We'll get this in educator e-news as soon as something's approved by the department. We don't have anything approved at this time. We're kind of going back on the fine print of the language, but they are willing to work with us because they definitely understand our concerns about communicating it out and changing something without letting people know. So those are just a few things that impact you and your students that I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to join this roundtable and update you all on. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of that or anything unrelated, but I know we're over time here. So just to wrap up my comments, I know, as I said at the beginning of my update, we don't know that these things are an issue until we hear from you. So we didn't know about this interpretation change until we were notified by a couple of educators that this happened to their students. So as soon as you're seeing things like this come up, please let us know so that we can act on it for you, because we're not working in the field. So anything you can let us know and be our eyes on the ground is really helpful to us so that we can help you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We really appreciate that update. And again, I want to be sure to thank Michelle and Elizabeth and all of you for participating and providing such great feedback and resources for your colleagues here on the call. I also want to let you know that this session has been recorded. So if it's something that you want to share with other colleagues that you know weren't able to make it today, we can make that available to you. And also, we will be sending out the slides from today's presentation via email. So you can look for those in your inbox potentially later today, and if not, for sure by Monday. Thank you all again for participating. We're always here to help. You've heard mention the task force several times today, the educators task force. If you're not part of the task force and this is something that you would be interested in participating in, I encourage you to reach out to Denise Ennis. She's the director of member engagement and academics and is also the staff liaison to our educators task force. Lots of great ideas. Planning this session came out of that task force. So this is the kind of things that we're able to do and feedback that we're able to provide to all of you. Again, thanks to everyone and enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a great weekend.
Hi, everyone.